President of the Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation. And I'm here with a brief commercial message. My commercial message is twofold. The first one is that there have been lots of reports about the events of September 18th regarding the Toronto District School Board, including reports that children were pressured into marching in the parade chanting anti-Israel slogans, and that some children came home from school with stickers or buttons that said "Kill Zionism" or "Zionism kills." These are all stories. Some of them might be rumors, some of them might be gossip, but what I need are facts and evidence. So if there's anyone in this room who has direct knowledge of what happened on September 18th, either they're a family member of a student or they were there themselves, then I really would be grateful if they could step forward and contact me or Andrea or Anita, because we need to compile this, we need to work it into written statements that can be used in front of the school board, in front of the Ontario College of Teachers. So that's number one. The second item is that on Wednesday at 4:30 p.m., the TDSB Programs and School Services Committee will be meeting at TDSB headquarters, 5050 Yonge Street. And if the events of October 18th upset you, if you are bothered, vexed, irked by any of it, you have the right to appear before that committee to speak to the trustees face-to-face and tell them what you think. In order for that to happen, you need to file a piece of paper called the delegation request form with the TDSB administration by 4 o'clock on Monday. You can get a copy of the form by going to the TDSB website, tdsb.on.ca, type in the request, which is delegation request form, get a copy, fill it out, send it in, and then they will give you all the instructions of how to appear. You can appear either in person or dial in over the phone if you're doing something somewhere else. So it would be very helpful if we could have several dozen people appear at that committee to voice the community's concerns about the events of September 18th, and if we could get some hard evidence as to the facts of what happened on that date as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So about 2 years ago, when my book first came out, I approached a philanthropist to ask him for some support. And he looked at me and he said, what do you think? Do I think that a anthropology professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz is responsible for all this? They're just spouting nonsense. No one cares what they say. And I didn't, needless to say, get any of the financial support I had hoped for. And on October 10th or 11th of last year, he called me up and he said, I really didn't understand what the how much influence the anthropology professor had. And I think we've all had this collective blind spot, except for people like Michael and William here, have had this collective blind spot about how trends in the academy could jump the lab in society and become so dominant in other institutions outside of the humanities department at Brown or at University of Toronto. And I think that's what we've seen. It was really in the late 1960s, and in fact, it was a protest at the San Francisco State College at the time to establish ethnic studies programs at these colleges that didn't adhere to the normal scholarly standards, that caught on, and within a few years there were 1,300 such programs around the United States that were operating by a very different set of standards that later dominated the academy. And I think if we're going to understand how to get out of the current situation, we're going to have to understand how they did it. What the long march through institutions, that's what they called it, Rudy Deutschke coined the term, how that took hold within institutions, and what our long march through institutions, and it's going to be a long march, by the way, needs to look like. And for this, we're very fortunate to have two really very thoughtful people with us. My friend, Dr. Michael Poliakoff, is the CEO, is that the right title? CEO of the American Council of Trustees and Alum. And he's really a serious public intellectual and activist, which is a very powerful combination. Knows everybody in this field, and I think has a lot to You do. Come on, I'm not. You do, and has a lot to talk about, and can talk a bit about what he's done in the U.S. and I think where it applies and where it might not apply so well in the Canadian scene. And also William Harper, who's a professor of medicine at McMaster, has written and thought about this. He's been in the field of diversity himself, and I think it's going to be really interesting to hear his insights about what this field does and what we need to do in order to return back to some measure of sanity.
I'm a double agent.
You're a double agent, right. Well, we're going to learn more about that. And maybe we'll see you on the other side's panels as well. I don't know. But Michael, I want to start with you. How did we get here?
It's not as if they didn't tell us what they were going to do. It goes all the way back to Antonio Gramsci. Said, well, you know, the revolution is not working. We'll do it through education and culture. And they did. And a lot of it is coming from a very, very broken academic system. That's to say, who is doing the hiring? Who is hiring the professors? How did we get this echo chamber that now exists in which there's relatively little representation and certainly no tolerance for views that are challenging a very left-wing orthodoxy? When I started my career in the academy, which goes back to, 1980, there still seemed to be an ethic that you hire according to merit. You get the best mathematician, the best biologist that you can find. Well, what's happened now? And I understand Canada is suffering from the same pathology. There'll be a diversity screening. I published an article in Forbes a couple of years back when I discovered the screening device that Berkeley uses. And that's the gateway. The candidate doesn't even get to talk about research or teaching unless the candidate gets through the diversity screen. And the answer that I would give if asked, what's your attitude towards people of different backgrounds, is I treat everybody the same. That's a failing answer. Unless you could show you were an activist, you were out of there. So I wrote a very sassy article that the young Albert Einstein would never have been hired at Berkeley. God save them. And God save us, because the lifeblood of our progress is going to be coming out of what should be a meritocracy. And when that breaks down, we are so totally and completely lost. So yeah, this is where we are. I've got some ideas for how we break out of it, but that later.
Great, thank you. What's your diagnosis of what's gone wrong?
Oh, there's a lot that's gone wrong. I think, before I say what's gone wrong, I'll maybe just describe a little bit about myself. So I'm a medical doctor and a researcher. Been at McMaster since 2002. I did train at the University of Toronto, medical school, molecular biology. Having worked in these fields, and I was talking to Michael before on the lunch, we were used to working in a very hard science way. Even in the context of medicine, people know that medicine is both an art and a science. At McMaster, that's not the case. McMaster is the home of evidence-based medicine, and it was from McMaster that proliferated out, actually. And so you take a really objective empiricism perspective to how you practice medicine, and certainly how we did clinical trials, and I've been doing that for 20 years, up to and including during the pandemic. We were running COVID trials, and I was working on the COVID units. And a strange thing happened around 2015. You'll all remember there was the Me Too movement, and that sort of permeated into the sciences as well. And I started to see a lot of people in my departments demanding to address gender inequity and sexual harassment and all these things, which I'm a fairly left-leaning progressive person, and I decided I would try to help with that, but I was worried about the potential for us moving away from meritocracy, moving away from objective reality, where I'm really all about objective reality testing, which is what I think liberalism was designed to do in actual fact. And so I got involved, and I helped craft, and we even did different strategies and studies, and we published on that, and I sent those articles to you, David and Michael, about an alternate strategy to DEI, because I knew DEI wasn't going to work. Now, you have to understand something about DEI, being an academic in this, and on the inside, but fighting it always, is you have to know what DEI is. People know what DEI is? It stands for diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity, hey, what's wrong with diversity? There's nothing wrong with that, actually. You would like to know that there's an equality of opportunity for everybody, but more importantly, you want to have a diverser pool so you know that you're going to get all the best candidates regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, what have you. And what about equity? So again, I think that was mentioned earlier by our legal group. The difference between equality and equity, as far as I can tell, Jordan Peterson is the only person who drew that hard line as where does the left become radical? Where does the left go wrong? And when they transverse from equality of opportunity to equality of outcome. That clarification, an understanding of that, I think that warrants a Nobel Prize in economics, to be frank. But I don't know. I mean, he's just such a polarizing figure. And I'm an endocrinologist. I do transgender work, so I have my beefs and issues with Jordan Peterson. But that is something that is important to understand, because when you do that, for so many reasons, if you're a person who's studying in hard sciences, you will know that there are so many reasons why there isn't an inequality of outcomes. And it often has nothing to do with systemic discrimination of any kind. And the things you try to fix are going to break everything else. So when Michael says the meritocracy is gone, we're going to fall, we are going to fall. And it's like Chesterton's fence, right? Two people in the forest, there's a fence. Let's take this fence down. I like this fence. You don't know why the fence is up? You better not take that fence down.
Let's spend some time on DEI. I think it's obviously a key topic. First of all, DEI in universities, clearly being debated right now, probably after December 5th when the 3 college presidents came before Congress. Before then, no one knew what DEI was. I mean, very few people did. We did some polling on it in the US, and out of 1,600 likely voters, it was a very small percentage of people who could even identify what DEI was. That's clearly changed. We're now talking about DEI. Michael, to what percentage of the problem do you think DEI bureaucracies are? And how important is it that we try to dismantle them or change them, which I think others are talking about?
I'll start with your last question. Get rid of them. They are so totally taken over by a perverse ideology and indeed, in many cases, real anti-Semitism. They need to be eliminated. And there are other ways that one can make sure that our very Jewish and very wonderful commitment to tzedakah, to chesed, these are our core values, that they can be put into effect. But let's talk just for a moment about the damage. I'll start with admissions. When I was an undergraduate at Yale, about 40% of the student body was Jewish. It's down into the low teens from last report. And why? Because under DEI ideology, we're too white. We're in a bad position. According to the hard right, we're not white at all. And it was, of course, part of Nazi ideology. But more dangerously now, we're the kind of double white. And so we need a double dose of discrimination to get us to equity. So yeah, that all is perverse. If you want to read a sort of see and weep report, Jay Green, a friend of mine, analyzed the available Twitter postings from DEI officials. And what he discovered was that 90% of them were anti-Israel. And for the most part, despite the treatment of the Uyghurs in China, they were positive about China. These people are so, forgive me for speaking dogmatically, so ideology-addled that they need to get off the landscape so that we can build back what ought to be a commitment to what my friend Dorian Abbott got canceled for, merit, fairness, and equality. Those ought to be the leading lights.
I'm going to go to you in a second, William, but a African-American political philosopher at Harvard named Danielle Allen wrote a piece recently, maybe a few months ago, about the DEI effort that was in the works at Harvard before the George Floyd reckoning. And she had tried to introduce a less ideological, more humane version of DEI that included viewpoint diversity. Now, if you include viewpoint diversity as one source of diversity, it necessarily means that they can't impose an ideological framework as part of DEI. And there are people saying, look, okay, I'm using American parlance here, so forgive me. In red states that are Republican dominated, go ahead and banish DEI, have Ron DeSantis get rid of it. But in blue states where they're not willing to do it, maybe that's a possibility. Maybe they can embrace the Danielle Allen form of DEI, and yes, it'll still be susceptible to takeover, ideological takeover. It'll be less so because it'll be formed in this image of viewpoint diversity.
With William's kind leave for a moment, I just wanted to answer that quickly. Yes, and I'd like to see it go very deep. Here's an example. It would be inconceivable, at least in America and I suspect in Canada, to have a search committee that was made up entirely of Caucasian males. And I think that's probably good practice because confirmation bias lurks waiting for all of us, and the way we get around it is to have different viewpoints. So why is it okay for the econ department to have a search without a single person who knows what classical liberalism is, much less believes it, who's ever read Hayek or Milton Friedman? Why is it okay for the poli-sci department to proceed that way? Where's the intellectual diversity in that search committee, to say nothing of a tenure committee? And it's actually something that I have been suggesting to trustees. Make sure that in a tenure and promotion committee, you have the same kind of diversity that you would value from other representations based on ethnicity or gender. So yeah, exactly right. If we're going to have a diversity policy, that's where it needs to begin.
I got to echo that. I think any economics department that teaches Marx but doesn't teach Hayek is severely imbalanced. Systemic discrimination, systemic racism, systemic inequities due to anything, sexual orientation, gender, what have you. The question is why? We had a panel of lawyers here, and they sort of danced around it. Pretty much since the 1960s, with the civil rights movement, there was an abolition of any legal reasons for there to be systemic discrimination. It's not possible. It's literally not possible. And yet, there's still systemic discrimination. So you had people wondering why. And what they came up with is actually, there was two Jews, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who came up with the concept of cognitive bias or systemic bias. You mentioned the systemic bias. And that is the thought. This is the reason why this is happening. And so this actually came out of Harvard. There was a couple of scientists there, psychologists, Anthony Greenwald and Mahzarin Bhanji, who came up with things called the implicit association test and unconscious bias training. And real good researchers, psychologists like Phil Tetlock, showed that all that stuff was nonsense, it doesn't work. And yet, it didn't stop those two, Greenwald and Bandry, from writing all sorts of books and making a lot of money, and then Harvard outsourcing Project Implicit to every single HR department in the world. And that HR department has now infiltrated academia, government, corporations, journalism, everywhere. And so what's going to happen is your organization, you're working someplace and everything seems fine, and all of a sudden they hire a DEI consultation firm comes over, they run a bunch of implicit association tests that don't work, but they label everyone racist or sexist or whatever, and then they have you take all these modules. Put your hands up if you've had to take one of these diversity training modules. Okay. And you learn, you know, when you take these modules and you sort of learn about, you know, whatever you want to learn about, racism, sexism, when you do the studies on those modules, you know what happens? When people take those modules, they become more discriminatory afterwards. They become more discriminatory. Think about that. So they don't know why there's systemic discrimination. They have totally screwed up Kahneman's, if you really want to learn about Daniel Kahneman, read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. You'll learn about System 1 minds and System 2 minds. But every researcher after that has completely bastardized the work, and they've turned it into this weaponization against us. Those two psychologists, they published in the Wall Street Journal, and they admitted, finally, in September, that it doesn't work. They admitted it. Go read their article. We need to fight against this. It's a real problem.
Thank you. So this may technically exceed the bounds of our mandate here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The Jewish community, mainstream Jewish community, is really struggling with DEI. I was on the phone with a pretty significant Jewish figure in the U.S. who said, we believe in reform, not abolish. And I said, well, what do you mean by reform? The only thing that they mean by reform, it's not what Danielle Allen from Harvard meant by reform, it's getting the Jewish narrative of anti-Semitism into the mix. And they believe that that's the best way to mitigate anti-Semitism. And then they'll say, look, I may not like DEI, many of them do, some might not, but it's the only game in town. And I'm the one who has to stand in front of a Jewish parent who is saying, why is my kid being mistreated? So how is it that I, in that moment, cannot say, make sure you're sensitizing the faculty about Jews when you're doing it for everybody else? So that's the debate. Are these people mistaken for trying to get Jews into the DEI mix? Michael.
It's hardwired within all of us. Two words, whether you do them in Hebrew or English, tzedakah and mishpat. I'm here channeling the late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Yes, we invented social justice, for heaven's sakes.
That's right, that's right.
But it's tempered with mishpat, which is judgment, fairness, the equality under the law. And you take that out of the equation, and again, you have just enemy. You have a terrible power game. I don't want to see the situation in which we have yet another piece of intersectionality viciously competing in the hierarchy of who gets what. Let's get us back to basic fairness and justice. And that's why, our Supreme Court decision, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, was terrific. Of course, the university is trying very hard to evade it, but let's get back to fair admissions, and let's add on fair hiring practices, fair contracting practices, and all of that, of course, tempered with tzedakah, our desire to help those who need help, but not at the cost of putting a thumb on the scale and just keeping this inane dialogue going on and on about who's a bigger victim. Let's not have victims. Let's have everybody winning.
I'm going to go back to the DEI words again. Diversity, okay? Even equity. I'm going to say, you know, if you've got a group of people doing a job that doesn't require a lot of merit, say it's easily trainable, and everybody there is a white male, I think a strong argument could be made that some affirmative action needs to be put in just to even create the mix of people you need in that workplace to just have people that could eventually be promoted higher. There's issues. Obviously, I've already mentioned there's issues with equity and such. And there are other solutions. When people say DEI is the only game in town, that's not true. There's DAVNA, we published on it. But I'm going to point out the biggest problem with DEI isn't the D or the E. It's the I. It's the I. The inclusion, the inclusivity. It's that aspect of it that's the ideological aspect. It's that aspect of it that you have difficulty fighting against. When you sort of say, hey, this seems unfair, you know, people are being murdered and raped and kidnapped, and all these people that I work with at the university, I thought they would have been supportive at least on October 7th. No, they're not. Why? It's because of the DEI, the I part of it. That inclusive ideology is the part that says Jews are oppressors, whatever happened to them on October 7th, in the context of that, can be justified by freedom fighters or whatever nonsense they want to say. It's that ideology that allows my esteemed colleagues and academics on the date, on October 12th, and I'll mention his name because he put it on public, Emil Joseph, who was the head of social worker in our university, basically said, what do you think decolonization was? When you went to a DEI seminar at your university or at your workplace, what did you think decolonization was? This is what it is. He said that at noon on October the 7th. I made a complaint to the university about him, and they told me he has academic freedom and freedom of speech. It's the ideology. It is the I in DEI that's the biggest problem. That is what we need to fight.
Interesting take. So we in the Jewish community are watching all of this stuff happening on campus, the encampments and the restriction of entry into school buildings and the library. We saw what happened at UCLA last spring, and then of course there was a legal injunction against the university for allowing that to continue to happen. And it's very easy to get sort of caught up above the waterline where the anti-Semitism is, and to say, let's stop that. Let's get the university to stop that. Let's find ways of stopping it. Let's sue. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do all those things, but it seems to me we're playing a game of whack-a-mole. And that there's a deeper problem in the university and why this keeps on coming up. And until we deal with that deeper problem, we're going to keep playing whack-a-mole. And so what I'm trying to get a sense of here is, what are some of the hopeful signs or the things that we could build on, or the interventions at our disposal that might have been opened up, particularly after December 5th, when people sort of awoke into the problem and saw the deep-seated nature of this? What do you think we need to do?
Well, this gets us to where we really can give ourselves an agenda. The absence of intellectual diversity on our campuses is at the very root of this. Who's there to challenge the absolute logical inconsistencies of settler colonialism, of woke? And by the way, let me say, David, how much I appreciate your book, how really, really important it is.
Buy that book. Read that book.
So how do we get around this? One of the things that my agency, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, has been doing is been working with state legislatures to provide funding to start independent institutes with their own hiring authority to, in our case, revive the study of American history and government, which of course the wokesters all look upon as something that should be, completely deprogrammed, deplatformed, whatever their word is. Let's start thinking about doing this for Jewish studies and for Israel studies, not like the Benaroya gift at University of Washington. You got to watch every step of this. But if philanthropists will stop writing blank checks to the alma mater and will start coming together to offer funding, and it can only be an offer, but in today's environment, offers to universities are usually something to take seriously, to create a whole new set of academic opportunities. This could be a game changer. The thought that students would have mentors on campus who would really push back against the canards, against the half-truths. This offers a ray of hope, and we've seen it start, at least in America, with at least an understanding of our own country. And of course, I personally believe that our founders brought something really wonderful to the world, including a belief in religious freedom. That's something that is never told us by the wokesters. And so to do that, to replicate that model, could be a real solution. If I may offer one other free service of ours. We have something called the Fund for Academic Renewal. We help philanthropists to create gift agreements. We even get free legal counsel to make sure they're as tight as possible so that they can put into reality the things that they most want to see. University can say no, it's a totally open relationship. But instead of feeding the beast so that there can be yet more people in the DEI office or yet more people teaching settler colonialism, there are opportunities for philanthropists to create on campus the things that are most important and most urgent. We have the power. We have the power of philanthropy. We have the power of publicity. We don't need to be mired in a very, very broken status quo.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. It's great work you're doing, and obviously we're doing work at our university, and you're doing work in the U.S., and we had some lawyers talking earlier, and Mike Tepper's doing great work. One thing I want to talk about is what each individual in this room can do, because I think a lot of you feel, I'm not a physician or scientist or lawyer or journalist, and what can I do in the face of you're telling us the judges are against us and stuff. Now, what power do I have in front of that? And I think you have more power than you think. I think things are going in a bad way, but we're not there yet. And I'm going to ask David to speak to that, because he says that in his book about being brave and not resorting to doublethink when we're not quite in a totalitarian state yet. And how you get into a totalitarian state is giving in to this and keeping silent. And Jonathan Kay was here, and he's written quite a bit on, and I know we have a principal in the audience. If you know the story of Richard Blitzko, it was a terrible thing that happened to him, driven to suicide by a DEI ideologue. But part of what happened was he was alone. None of his other fellow teachers, they were too afraid to stand up, and then, in fact, probably joined in to you get this sort of urge as a human to sort of join in and resist that urge. When you get that urge to join into anything like that, when you get that urge to report it, resist that urge. You know what's right, stand up for what's right, do what's right. I really believe Richard would be alive today if some of his other colleagues had stood up.
Thank you. Yeah, very powerful. We heard from my hero, Natan Sharansky, by video earlier, and he urges courage. Obviously, he's a very courageous person. And he makes the point, he said, look, if you were courageous or dissident in the former Soviet Union, they could disappear you. And he spent 9 years in the Gulag himself, and he's saying to us, no one is going to disappear you in Canada or the US. So let's understand what courage means in our context, and we can show a little bit more perhaps than we may think. It took me a little while when I started the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values to understand that I wasn't in the anti-woke business or in the sort of advocacy business. I was in the courage business. And so then I started to ask myself, okay, how do you get people to be courageous? And just 2 quick examples of that. I was giving a talk at a synagogue about the problems in K through 12 education. And after I was done, a teacher came up to me and he said, I have all the goods for you. I have all the curricula and the pedagogies that are teaching all this. I said, wow, I'd love to see it. Can I see it? He said, I'm thinking about it. And then I said, okay, let's have coffee. So we have coffee. And you know, he's very nervous about this. And I said, are you worried about getting fired? No, I'm of the age where I don't have to worry about that. If they fire me, they fire me. What are you worried about? So he just took a deep breath and he said, I'm worried Antifa is going to show up at my door. And I said to him, I've been doing this for a couple years now. I wrote a book about it and nobody from Antifa has showed up my door. And he sort of took a deep breath and he said, okay, and he gave me everything I asked for. A second quick story, a Jewish professional advocate, somebody who agreed 100% with what I was arguing, 100%, and told me in no uncertain terms and would write me every time somebody was attacking me, and I get these mysterious Facebook messages from people, thank you for what you're doing, but it's never public, it's always the messenger. And so I finally asked her, would you have me come and speak at your organization? Let me think about it, okay. Then after I talked, I said, would you take a picture of us and put it on Facebook? Let me think about it, okay. Then I asked her, would you put a message into the listserv of your various colleagues telling them, again, let me think about it, okay. By the way, that's what caused the eruption, was that last part where she put it in the listserv. But again, she didn't, you know, she's still there. She's still a prominent voice in our community. And I think part of what we have to do is talk people through this to get them there. Courage is contagious. And it's contagious at the academic level, it's contagious at the K through 12 level, and it's contagious at the Jewish communal level. So we need to demonstrate that. We need to step up ourselves and bring others along with us. Thank you.
That's so beautifully put, David. There are, 2 Hebrew phrases to keep in mind. Im ein ani li mili. If I'm not going to stand up for myself, who's going to do that? And I'll continue down from Pirkei Avot. If not now, when? And the other one that we have to keep in mind is what we're at least supposed to recite twice a day in the Shema and the V'ahavta. Vishinantam levanecha. You shall teach these things to your children. And the example of courage is absolutely crucial. Jewish stars, kippot, and I realize on the streets of Toronto that could be a problem, but this is the way that we say, we're here and we're not going anywhere.
All right. I have one more question to you both, and I'm going to open up to the audience here. And it's a tension that I feel intensely about what's going on campus. On the one hand, Jewish students deserve all the equal protection that every other student gets. And by U.S. law, by the way, equal protection is an absolute obligation that any institution and every university must provide. On the other hand, I don't want the message that Jewish students are fragile and unsafe and therefore need to fear the campus. And I'm worried that the message that we give, create a safe space for our kids, that is also instilling a fear in our own children that will not serve them well and will not make them the kind of activists that we need to win this in the long run. How do you navigate that tension?
Well, I'll give an example, a negative example. When the apartheid wall went up at Wellesley College, where I once taught, as it did on so many other campuses. The director sent out a message: our Hillel Lounge will be a safe space for you during these disturbing days. No! Get out there and put up our posters. Apartheid state. Hadassah Hospital, 50% Arab, 50% Jewish, both staff and patients. Apartheid state? Salim Jabbar, who was on the Supreme Court at the time, get out there. And that's something that we need leadership to do. We should insist upon that, especially those who are in a position to do so. Let me make one other offer here. Bernard-Henri Lévy was in the United States recently, spoke at French philosopher, humanitarian, filmmaker, and was in Israel starting October 18th to cover all the events. He's just written a book called Israel Alone. That's the English title. There's a French version as well. We now have the resources to send free copies to thousands of college students. If you are in a position to distribute this book, which is all about how a person responds to the canards and the lies, contact me. We want to make sure that our students can stand on their 2 feet and say, genocide, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Apartheid, you don't know what you're talking about. White privilege for Jews, well, we're doing pretty well now. That wasn't true of my parents' generation, that's for sure. So let's take this in our hands and move forward.
When I made the complaint about Emil Joseph, I wasn't naive. I had no expectations he'd be muzzled. And I didn't make the complaint actually for that. I made the complaint so that I would have a clear statement from the President's office that he had academic freedom and freedom of speech, so that I knew that I did also. I don't believe universities should be a safe space. I don't believe that. Staying away from danger is how you get fragile and frail. It's only in opposition to difficult things that you develop resilience and strength. And so I would encourage people to not ask anybody to not have their freedom of speech, but read these documents you've got, Michael, and educate yourself so that you can combat. And when I say combat, I'm talking no violence, stay with rationality and reason and have your facts straight, and be able to win a logical argument. That's it. And I think that through that debate and dialectic, that's what university's all about.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from the audience. I see you back there. Oh, someone has the mic first. Okay, you're next then. This young lady's next. Go ahead.
Thanks. Lawrence Klotz. I'm at U of T. And one of the features of many institutions of higher education has been various departments taking very strong positions on behalf of their department on, for example, the war in Gaza. And one of my hats is a small group of us inaugurated something called the Council for Academic Freedom at University of Toronto. I'm the chairman. And we are fighting for a policy of institutional neutrality. In other words, the role of the university is not to take a position, it's to cultivate diversity of thought. And I just wonder if you can comment from your perspective, David, I think it is, do you see this as an important goal moving forward? Because it's be a major shift, for example, OISE to no longer take positions on some of these statements, which by and large tend to be pro-EDI, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think institutional neutrality should be absolutely one of our goals. Look, we have a choice when we're seeing this on seeing this go down on campus. We can do what our friend Nadine Strawson says and try to level up. In other words, yes, college presidents have been total hypocrites with all this. Yes, they're protective of certain speech and completely open to others. But we're going to level up because we know ultimately that the only way that Jews do well in any society or any university is when there is free speech and there's free exchange and all the values that we just heard are in place. Or we could level down, by the way. And level down would mean you're protecting everybody else, so protect us too. And I think we're better off leveling up. And that means institutional neutrality. That means freedom of expression. That means academic freedom, but true academic freedom, not the way that it's been weaponized these days. Thank you.
If I could just add, absolutely right, David. And where this is going to be particularly important is going to be the handling of the endowment, because the institutionally neutral university is going to say to BDS, this is not even a topic for discussion. The fiscal policies of this university and the endowment are things that are left in the hands of our financial professionals. So we're not even talking about that. And that has happened at University of Chicago, it's happened at Vanderbilt. And the more that we can get there, the more we cut the legs out of this perverse BDS movement.
Just one more comment on that. Just so you know, the organization FIRE does an annual survey of speech on campus. What are the bottom 3 campuses on speech? Harvard, Penn, and Columbia. In other words, the places where there is the least amount of speech are also the most hostile to Jewish students. And the most expensive. Thank you, Andrea. Oh, there you are, right there. Thank you for coming up.
She should be taking one.
First, I told her first, so then we'll go next.
Hi, my name is Judy. I'm a mediator. I have kids in university age and younger. My question with the courage is just about the scariness of the violence on the other side. Like, that's, I think, what is difficult for us as parents to teach our kids to be diligent. On one hand, you want them to sort of keep their heads down because there is that fear of the violence, right, that we see on so many of these situations. So what do you suggest?
You want to start? Why don't you start one?
Sure. Yeah, again, when I'm talking about courage, and I was giving the example of Blitzko, it's not about, like, again, putting yourself in danger. There's a riot going on. Get into the middle of that riot. I'm talking about standing up for your colleagues, standing up for what you think is right, but keeping it nonviolent and keeping it civil. This is one of the things the DEIs hate. They hate that word civil. That's crazy. But like, and obviously, if you're talking about, okay, there's encampments or there's protests happening and you want to do a counter protest, do it safely. You don't be there alone. Let me be there with a group of people and stuff like that. And again, if something happens, be quick to call the police or the security on campus and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think people should feel that they have a right to protest and not be subject to violence. But at the end of the day, I don't think it serves anyone to say, look, it could be dangerous, just hide out in your room and avoid things. First of all, I don't know your kids, but they're not going to listen to you anyway. If they're anything like my kids, they're not going to listen anyway. So,
I just want to add one thing. Moral courage is easier when a person has physical courage. And every one of our children should be trained in martial arts. This is, we don't have to cower. And yes, I mean, a fist fight is not fun. I'm not holding myself up as a figure of virtue, but coming after October, I decided for the first time in my life I'm wearing my kippah everywhere. Professional meetings, on the street, whatever. I'm 71, but I think I could still take somebody's kneecap off if I had to. We got to get there.
I just want to add one thing to this, that we can draw a line between conduct and speech. setting up an encampment that lasts 6 weeks is not speech. It's taking over a large swath of campus.
Heckler's veto is not
Heckler's
speech.
veto is not speech. Following a group of Jewish students around into their hillel and then, yelling slogans at them while they're trying to have Friday night services is not speech. Stopping a student from going to the campus library is not speech. And so we should urge, in no uncertain terms, universities to intervene there. But that doesn't mean we should try to get them to shut down every chant that we don't like. I'm going to let others. Yes.
Hi, so my name is Elisa. I have 3 solutions. Maybe you have more for these situations that we are all in. But before, I will tell you that I came from Israel in 2000, and I was in shock to see the anti-Semitism rising every single year. And when I say to people, people didn't believe me, and here you go. So I have 3 solutions. The first one, stop donating to anything anti-Semite, including universities, hospitals, everything else. I was in a building when I did my PhD, I was in a building that a Jewish donor donated, and a student say anti-Semitics, and the professor didn't say anything. So stop donating to those institutions. The second thing, use all legal means to sue everything you can. The third one is mobilize the entire community to do, I'm doing, and other people here, including Clara, my friend, and other people here are doing extra work, like our second job, to fight anti-Semitism every single day, because this is our future of our kids. Our kids won't be able to live here. It seems like 1933 here in Canada. If you know history, it feels the same thing, the same stories, stores, schools. So we have to mobilize the entire communities. We are only less than 15 million around the world, less than where we were during World War II, post-World War II. So we are such a small people, we should all fight. So my question is, do you have any other solution in addition to those 3?
Those are core things to do. I would add one more. Think about the experience of Jewish students as they get to campus. Many have not had a strong Jewish education. Most of them are coming out of liberal homes, and I don't mean classical liberal. They come to campus, they want to be accepted. How do you get accepted? Well, you show your bona fides, that you're not sexist, you're not homophobic, you're not racist, you're not, whatever. And the price for that is to say, well, I hate Israel, I'm not a Zionist. We need to really ramp up the sense of belonging. Our Hillels have to do a better job of this. I don't mean to be critical from a distance, but they've got to make it something that is appealing, that answers to the values of our younger generation, so that they're not so easily coerced into this sense of self-hatred, self-wounding. And until we do that, we've got a very, very serious problem in front of us.
I think you have to do something. Something must be done about the progressive, as a Jew, Jewish contingent. It is very undermining. It's very difficult. It is a real problem. And when I say that, you can't, the reason liberalism, you know why there's freedom of religion? People don't, you think, wasn't the Enlightenment getting away from religion and dogma? And it was, but they kept that in there because the way, this is another Tversky Kahneman thing, the way the human mind works is if I give you something factual, like I'm a scientist, it'll go one ear in one ear out the other, and you'll never remember, and it'll just be meaningless to you. The human system, one mind, it needs something seductive, it needs something mysterious and needs something, and an enigma and needs some kind of idea. You cannot have people drop an idea, whether that's anti-Zionism or progressivism, without replacing it with another idea. You need to somehow, whether it's in your traditions, you have to find a way to win back and discredit that. Like the Norm Finkelsteins in the world, that you're going to have to find a way to make them look ridiculous because they're a problem.
Wanted to add one thing that's very, very accessible. Speaker series on campus. Philanthropists, they want to do something not terribly expensive, but they have to have control over it. Get the people from IDF, from our supportive agencies to speak, to make it even seem perhaps a little bit cool. Now, there can be some campus nonsense about that, and we need to be vigilant to make sure that administrators support it. But this is a first step in changing the culture.
Don't sell yourself short. You're pretty cool, Michael.
Great. We have one last question here, and then we're going to go to our other panel.
I'm a retired co-founder of Canadians for Israel's Education Foundation. I want to address the crux of the problem, which is the lie about occupation. Israel has legal rights and it's not an occupier. And we're talking about a game changer. A game changer would be education, and educating not only students but the educators. We see all over universities, the Ivy League and whatever. I don't need to speak about that, we all know. And I think that education is the problem. And I happen to have a book with me, which is a very concise information on Israel's legal rights. I would like to get assistance in spreading the word, in giving a big voice. I'm a very small voice, but we need a big voice, a general information or a PR company to spread the information about the fact that Israel has legal rights. We are not occupiers. We are not, whatever the word is, I can't recall anymore. I want you to know.
Colonialists.
This is my first time I speak up in public, but I hear a lot of speech about game changer. Game changer is we are not occupied. And
This is summary of that.
Go ahead.
It's even smaller. What's it called? It's called The Jewish People's Rights to the Land of Israel. It's beautifully organized. I've written about it. I tell everybody about it. A student would find it very reader-friendly. It's got colors. It's got summaries. And it's all based on the international laws. And it's all based on research that is unrebuttable. So we should always remember that international law is something you can rant and rave at universities about occupation and everything else. But when treaties are going to be made and negotiations are going to take place, they're going to take place based on laws like that were held at San Remo and other places that cannot be changed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. This panel, thank you, the panel.